After 35 years of marriage, my husband told me he had found the love of his life. A modest woman who didn't care about luxury. I smiled, looked at my secretary and said, "Freeze the accounts, cancel his mother's insurance and change all the passwords." After 35 years of marriage, my husband came home and, with a smile on his face, announced that he had found the woman of his life. Just like that, calm as a cucumber, as if he were talking about the weather. I was standing in the kitchen stirring the dinner I had been cooking for him for 3 decades, and he sat at the table, telling me how special she was. He said she wasn't like me, that she was modest, simple, and that, unlike me, she didn't care about material things at all. I just looked at him, then slowly placed the ladle on the stove and smiled just as slowly. I turned to my secretary, who was sitting in the living room sorting through documents. Yes, I have a secretary, a fact my dear husband had apparently found very convenient to forget. And in a very calm voice, so calm I even surprised myself, I said, "Alicia, freeze all joint accounts, suspend the private insurance for his mother, and let's change all the passwords." I will never forget Marcus's face in that moment. It was the face of an absolutely bewildered man who was certain he could replace me as easily as a pair of old shoes. But that was just the warm-up. Neither my husband nor his mother understood yet who I really was and what I was capable of when seriously underestimated. Now let's get introduced properly. My name is Vivian Thorne Prescott. I am 68 years old, and for the last 35 of them I was the ideal wife, the submissive daughter-in-law, a woman who sacrificed literally everything for a family that, as it turned out, wasn't worth it at all. I met Marcus when I was just 33. I was working as the chief financial officer at a major firm in Chicago. I had my own 2-bedroom condo, my own car, my own life. I was the first woman in our family to get a college degree, and my father, God rest his soul, was proud of that to tears. Marcus seemed charming back then. He worked in sales, was always neatly dressed, well-groomed, with that smile that makes you feel like you are the only woman in the world. He courted me for 6 months before I agreed to marry him. My mother warned me. She said he was too pretty, too smooth-talking, that such men only bring trouble. But I was in love, or at least I thought I was. We had a beautiful wedding, a registry office ceremony, then a blessing in an old historic Baptist church downtown. I still remember that day with a very strange mixture of warm nostalgia and bitter regret. I was wearing my grandmother's wedding dress with lace she had once brought up from New Orleans. Marcus cried when I walked down the aisle. He swore to love and respect me until the end of his days. The first few years things were actually pretty good. I won't lie. We both worked, built a life together, bought our first home. A small but very cozy apartment in an old building near the Gold Coast. And then my mother-in-law, Mother Beatrice, moved in. A woman who made it clear from day one that I would never be good enough for her baby boy. Marcus was her only child, born late and prayed for. A spoiled boy who, according to her version of reality, never made a mistake in his life. When his father passed and left her with practically no pension and no savings, it was of course taken for granted that we, or rather I, should take care of her. Marcus continued to work, darting around the country on business trips, while I gradually turned into a nurse, a cook, and a housekeeper, all rolled into one for his mother. I quit my job. Marcus said it was temporary, that Mama needed special attention, that she was taking his father's death hard. That temporary stretched out for 30 years. For 30 years, I cared for a woman who didn't have a single serious diagnosis, but who had become a master in the art of manipulation. She played on pity like a virtuoso, feigned weakness, moaned, sighed, and her blood pressure would spike the moment Marcus stepped through the door. For 30 years I listened to how my gumbo wasn't like the way she made it, how I didn't clean right, didn't dress right, wasn't homey enough, wasn't feminine enough, and how I never gave poor Marcus any children. Yes, we had no children. After many years of trying and painful procedures, it turned out I couldn't conceive. Mother Beatrice did everything to ensure I never forgot it. She considered it her duty to regularly remind me that I had failed at the main female task. And Marcus, my dear Marcus, never defended me once in all those years, not a single time. But I continued to be the ideal wife. I managed the household, cared for his mother, and made sure the house was spotless for his return from yet another business trip. Over time these trips became longer and more frequent. A week in Houston, 2 weeks in Seattle, a month somewhere in Atlanta. I remained alone with his mother, listening to her endless complaints, feeling my youth dissolve into her whims and demands. Marcus would arrive tired, irritated, and I always made sure total comfort awaited him at home. His favorite soul food, his shirts ironed exactly the way he liked, silence in the apartment so he could rest. I never complained. I never made scenes about the lonely nights, about the birthdays he spent in another city, about the anniversaries he forgot. I was Vivian, the understanding wife who realized he was grinding for the family. Years passed and I seemed to disappear. At 45, I looked at myself in the mirror one day, and didn't recognize the woman I used to be. My hair had started to gray. My body bore the marks of fatigue and constant tension. I stopped dressing up, wearing makeup, taking care of myself. Why bother? Marcus was almost never home, and when he barely looked at me. Mother Beatrice, of course, never missed a chance to note how I had let myself go, how her son deserved a woman who took care of herself. Yet it was I who continued to manage everything. All the bills, all the household expenses, the medical costs for my mother-in-law, which were not small despite her quite decent health, all our investments. I handled all of it. Marcus never had a head for numbers. He was always a charismatic salesman but a completely useless financier. So the responsibility fell on me just like everything else. About 5 years ago, Mother Beatrice finally started to truly decline. 87 years of accumulated malice and dissatisfaction finally took their toll. She needed more care, more attention. I hired caregivers, nurses, but she drove them all away. She said no one cared for her like I did. Marcus insisted that only I could make Mama truly happy. And I, like a fool, kept carrying it all on my back. I started having my own health problems. High blood pressure, insomnia, constant back pain from lifting and moving my mother-in-law. But my ailments interested no one. I was strong. I could handle anything. And against this backdrop, strange little things began to appear. Marcus, who used to be indifferent about his appearance, suddenly started taking great care of himself. He bought new clothes without even consulting me, something he had never done before. He joined a gym, started wearing a different cologne. When I asked what had changed, he said it was all because of work, that he needed to look good for clients. I wanted to believe him. And then the messages started. His phone, which used to lie around on the nightstand in the kitchen, or in his jacket pocket in the hallway, suddenly became part of his body. He took it with him even to the bathroom. He smiled while looking at the screen, typed something quickly, and instantly put the phone away as soon as I came closer. And that was when, for the first time, that anxious feeling truly stirred inside me, the kind you can't brush off. I pretended not to notice for a long time, but one night the feeling became simply unbearable. Marcus fell asleep instantly, as always, without even asking how my day was. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, realizing that if I didn't find out right now, I would simply go crazy with guessing. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I don't plan to be particularly ashamed of it either. I took his phone. It was lying on the nightstand as if begging to be picked up. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped it. I knew the passcode, of course. Not knowing your husband's code after so many years of marriage would take effort. And everything was there. Hundreds of messages from someone named Kiana. My angel, my light. Can't wait to hold you. Hearts, kisses, emojis, photographs, the two of them in restaurants, in hotel rooms, in beautiful places I had only seen on TV. She was young, about 40, no more, an ordinary pretty woman. Social media is full of them today. Tight dresses, lots of makeup, duck lips, filters on every selfie. In the messages, Marcus was a different person. Not the tired, eternally irritated man who grumbled about noise in the apartment and how the pot roast wasn't like Mama's. There he was, tender, attentive, romantic. He wrote to her that he missed her every minute, counted the days until they met, promised mountains of gold, bought her gifts, arranged little celebrations, planned weekends in hotels, and all this, by the way, on money that I managed, the very funds I had invested and multiplied for years while he earned them and immediately spent them. Not even really understanding how our finances were set up, I closed the phone, put it back on the nightstand as if I hadn't touched a thing. I didn't close my eyes again until morning. Hundreds of options spun in my head. Get up now, turn on the light, throw the phone in his face, scream, bring up all my years beside him. Kick him out of the house, call his mommy, tell her everything. But somewhere inside a quiet voice said, wait. Watch until the end. Know everything before you chop. I decided not to make a scene. I decided to observe. In the morning I acted as usual. Cooked breakfast, woke him up, served coffee, asked about his plans for the day. Suspecting nothing, he pecked me on the cheek and left for the office. Although I already knew the office was far from the only place in his life, I turned into a detective. I started carefully tracking his schedule. Little things I hadn't paid attention to before. What time he leaves, what time he returns, how often he washes his shirts, where the money from the cards goes. Marcus was never particularly smart. Charm he had, yes, but he considered brains a secondary matter, so tracking him turned out to be easier than easy. Very quickly it became clear who Kiana was. It turned out she worked as a receptionist at one of the hotels where he constantly stayed on business trips. They met there. He, a successful man from Chicago. She, a divorced woman with 2 teenagers, living on the outskirts in a small rented apartment, constantly hustling to pay off loans and feed the kids. For her, Marcus played the role of a prince. He described in vivid colors what an important specialist he was, how management valued him, how much he earned, how hard his life was with a cold and mercenary wife who didn't understand him and hadn't loved him for a long time. For several months I patiently watched him live a double life. At home I was still the model wife. The kitchen, medicine for his mom, order in the apartment, his favorite dishes upon his arrival. No hysterics, no suspicions, no sanas. I was the invisible woman in a robe, just as before. But in his phone and on his face when he secretly scrolled through messages, I saw a different Marcus. And here is what hurt the most. Not even his "my angel" and "I love you." Not the photos, not their romantic evenings. What cut me the deepest were his words about me. To Kiana he described me like this. An old evil woman who sits at home for years with my mother, a wife without passion and without life, who hasn't gone anywhere or socialized with anyone for a long time. He wrote that I was a bore, that I didn't want any social life myself, that I turned into a recluse by my own will, conveniently omitting the fact that it was he who once asked me to quit my job, abandon my career, forget about my girlfriend so as not to leave mama alone. He told Kiana that I was terribly mercenary, that I only cared about money, bills, appearances, that I was allegedly always unhappy that he had to grind to meet my demands. Me, a person who lived for 30 years serving the interests of someone else's mother, who never allowed herself anything expensive, wore the same clothes for several seasons just to save money, suddenly turned out to be a materialist. If it hadn't been so painful, one could have laughed. But the hardest thing turned out to be something else. In some exchange, scrolling through dozens of messages, I saw them discussing the future. Not a night in a hotel, not another gift, but the future. Marcus wrote to her that soon everything would change, that he would definitely divorce me. It just wasn't the time right now. That while his mother was alive, he couldn't leave because that woman, meaning me, was the only one who knew how to care for her. He confessed to Kiana that everything was long decided in his head. The moment Mama dies, he will be free. They will get married, travel, live for themselves, enjoy the life they deserve. He described trips to her, mutual plans, how they would meet old age together, quietly with wine by the sea, without the old witch in the apartment who does nothing but prevent them from being happy. He wrote this so calmly, so confidently, as if I were not a living person, not a wife with whom he lived for decades, but some glitch in the system, a technical issue that would resolve itself as soon as my mother-in-law departed this life. In that moment I understood very clearly. To him I am not a wife and not a partner. I am a convenient housekeeper, a free nurse for his mother, an accountant for all occasions, a part in the mechanism that he intended to throw away as soon as it, in his opinion, ceased to be useful. And it was precisely that night, rereading those lines, that I decided for the first time for real that if anyone was going to decide how our life would change, it would be me, not Marcus with his dream woman. When I realized that for Marcus I was just a convenient mechanism that he had already mentally crossed out of his future life, something clicked in me. Crying, making scenes, holding him by the sleeve and begging him to think about the years we spent together suddenly seemed like humiliation. But calmly weighing everything and arranging the pieces on the board seemed like the only dignified option. I decided not to break down. I decided to prepare. On the outside I remained the same Vivian, making stew for Mother Beatrice, giving injections, dispensing pills on schedule, washing his shirts, maintaining the appearance of a normal family life, while inside, step by step, I was building a plan. First I just watched. I watched how he was late from work, how new charges suddenly appeared on the cards, how his mood changed before and after business trips. Then I realized my observations were not enough. And I hired a private investigator. Yes, just like that. While I poured him soup and served him chops, somewhere on the other side of town a man was photographing him in hotel restaurants and noting which doors he entered and whom he left with. The more information I had, the calmer I became. The scariest thing is the unknown. When you know everything, fear disappears somewhere. Only cold clarity remains. And then one day everything came to a head. I remember that day in detail. Marcus returned home earlier than usual by an hour, maybe an hour and a half. But for a man habitually coming home late, this was already an event. Mother Beatrice was napping in her room after lunch. The TV mumbled in a low voice. I stood in the kitchen chopping salad and thinking my own thoughts. He walked in, sat at the table. For some time, he watched silently as I moved between the stove and the sink. And then with that signature little smile of his that once made everything inside me stop, he uttered, "Vivian, I need to talk to you. I think I've met the woman of my life." If I had heard this 10 years ago, I probably would have been torn apart. But by that moment I had already read all his angel, and I've been waiting for our night texts. I knew the name of this woman of his life, knew where she lived, how many loans she had, and what pills his mother took while he was romancing her. Therefore, I simply silently put down the knife, wiped my hands on a towel, and turned to him. He spoke for a long time, explaining how Kiana was not like everyone else, that she, unlike me, was simple, soft, without pretensions, that she didn't need money, that she wasn't with him for that, that beside her he felt alive again, young, needed. He said he understood it would be painful for me, unpleasant, but one cannot deceive oneself and live without love. That he too had a right to happiness. I listened, and at some moment, for the first time in a long time, I looked at him for real, not as a familiar background of sighs and complaints. Before me sat a 68-year-old man with gray temples, with a belly that no gym could hide anymore, with eternal complaints about either his blood pressure or his back. A man who devoutly believed that a woman 20 years younger fell in love with him as a person and not with his wallet. And that was when I was overcome not by despair, but by a strange, very sober feeling. He doesn't know who he's lived with for 35 years at all. Marcus never took an interest in my life before him. Didn't ask how I even came to have my own condo and car at 33. Didn't wonder where I got my connections, why I easily navigated documents, why conversations with lawyers and banks came so simply to me. For some reason, he was absolutely convinced that as soon as I quit my job, I became completely dependent on him. And certainly, he never once truly read what he was signing. All these years he signed with a light hand on any paper I placed before him. "You're my accountant. You know best." He proudly repeated that he completely trusted his wife, and didn't even suspect how much this trust would cost him. My father died 15 years ago. He was a very successful entrepreneur dealing in real estate back in the days when many considered it a strange endeavor. He had warehouses and old buildings on the south side, lots with unfinished construction. Back then they weren't worth that much. But over time those neighborhoods turned to gold. He left everything to me, his only daughter. Land, buildings, shares in companies, investments. Even before the wedding, my father insisted that Marcus and I sign a prenuptial agreement, very gently, without a scandal, as if it were just a formality. But the contract was drawn up strictly and competently. Everything that belonged to me before the marriage and everything I would earn after was my separate property. Marcus signed without reading. He wasn't interested. He saw only the dress, the party, and the beautiful life ahead. Legal details never worried him. All these years, while he was sure we were living exclusively on his salary as a successful salesman, I was dealing with completely different figures. I carefully developed what my father bequeathed. Converted old warehouses into business centers, lots into residential complexes, invested money in stocks, in small companies that later grew into serious businesses. I had my own lawyers, my own financial advisors, my own circle of contacts. Marcus did not participate in any of this and wasn't even interested. The house we lived in, that joint cozy corner near the Gold Coast, was titled to me. The car he drove around on his business trips too. Practically all the accounts where money came in were my personal ones. It was enough for him to believe that he was the main breadwinner. I allowed him to think so. I said, we bought, we invested, we decided. Although in reality I decided. It was simpler for me to maintain his illusion than to explain that the world is a little more complex than his perceptions. And so on that day, when he sat before me in the kitchen and inspirationally told me about his great feeling, I already knew perfectly well that practically everything he considers ours is mine. He thought he came to pronounce a sentence on me. He didn't understand yet that he had passed the verdict on himself when he signed papers for years without looking and told another woman how soon he would get rid of me. I stood by the stove listening to his speeches about love and freedom, and I knew very clearly, this time the script will not be written by me in the role of the silent victim, but by me in the role of the mistress of the situation. And that evening, when he finally fell silent and paused, expecting tears and hysterics, I already had every word formulated in my head that I would say next, to him, to Alicia, and to everyone who was so confidently used to considering me the weak link. I listened to all his speeches about the right to happiness, true love, and the woman of his dreams. I nodded as if I understood everything, placed the towel on the table, and simply moved to the next step of my plan, the very thing I mentioned in passing at the beginning of this story. I turned to the kitchen door and called out loudly, "Alicia, please come in for a minute." Alicia, my secretary and lawyer, happened to be at my house that day. We were sorting through some papers related to one of the properties. She walked into the kitchen with a folder in her hands, calm as always. I looked at her just as evenly as I had just looked at my husband and said, "Alicia, we are blocking all joint accounts, suspending payment for the private insurance for Mother Beatrice, changing all internet banking passwords right now." Alicia nodded slightly, asking nothing, and walked out into the living room, already dialing someone on the phone. Marcus's face in that moment was priceless. "What accounts?" he squeezed out after a couple of seconds. "What are you doing anyway?" He looked from me to the direction where Alicia had gone, as if trying to figure out if this was a joke or not. "Exactly what I have the full right to do with my money and my property," I answered just as calmly. "Wait." He rose from the table. His voice trembled. "What do you mean with yours? Vivian, don't make me laugh. We built everything together. The house is ours. The accounts are ours. The car is mine. I worked my whole life." I smiled slightly. "You worked? Yes, that's true. And you will receive your earnings. Don't worry. But now let's take it in order." I called Alicia back, asked her to bring the folder we had been looking through earlier. "Sit down," I said. "We're going to have a little lesson." Marcus sat back down, but not so confidently anymore. His hands were shaking. Alicia laid the documents out on the table. "Here is the title deed to the house we live in." I calmly pointed to the first page. "See the name." He leaned in, read it. "It's only your name," he croaked. "Exactly. The house is mine." I picked up another document. "This car you drive is also in my name." Next, a stack of papers. "Accounts, investments, shares, and companies. Here," I continued, "are our joint savings. Only legally they are mine. You signed off on this more than once." Marcus grabbed at the papers like a drowning man grabs at a straw. His eyes darted across the lines, muttering something. "This can't be. We did everything together. I mean, I trusted you. And you signed what I gave you for 35 years straight without reading. Remember? I trust you. You're my accountant." He paled so much I was afraid he might fall right there in the kitchen. "You can't do this." He broke into a scream. "It's illegal. I slaved my whole life. That's our money." "Illegal?" I nodded at Alicia. "Alicia, can you clarify for Marcus how legal this is?" Alicia, without raising her voice, evenly explained. "There is a prenuptial agreement regarding separate property. All assets were registered in her name openly. He voluntarily signed the documents. We have full transparency. If he attempts to contest it, we have enough evidence to fight off any attempt." So she concluded, "From a legal standpoint, everything is in perfect order." Marcus shot a vicious glare in her direction, then stared at me again. "You've lost your mind," he hissed. "You can't leave me with nothing." "Firstly," I calmly took a sip of water, "I am not leaving you with nothing. You will receive exactly what you personally earned and contributed to the household over these years, to the penny." He twitched, wanted to object, but I raised a hand. "Secondly, if you want to leave for the woman of your life, you are an adult. Please, the door is open." But you will be leaving not with what you thought was ours, but with what is legally yours, and that, believe me, is not at all what you told Kiana about. I saw spasms pass over his face. How do you know her name? Marcus, I sighed slightly. Do you really think I'm a complete idiot? He fell silent. For some time we sat in silence. Only Mother Beatrice snored behind the wall, and the clock on the wall ticked. At some point he broke into threats, promised to bring in all the lawyers, sue for half, not let me live in peace. I listened to him spluttering saliva and thought only of one thing: how much he still doesn't understand the position he's in. When his first wave of hysteria subsided, I changed my tone slightly. You know, maybe I really went a little too far just now, I said more evenly. Too sudden for you at least. Let's do this. You live separately for a while, and in a few days we will calmly discuss everything without shouting. His eyes warmed slightly in that second. So you're still ready to come to an agreement somehow? I am ready to listen, I answered evasively. I also need time to think everything over. He grasped at the straw as always. All right, he mumbled. I'll go to a hotel for now. We both need to cool off. Of course, I nodded. We both understood perfectly well there would be no hotel. A couple of hours later, the private investigator I had been working with for some time sent the first report. Marcus, with a suitcase and an offended face, stood at the entrance of a panel apartment building on the outskirts, exactly where Kiana lived with her children. He entered the building, went up, rang the bell. Then came photos from inside the apartment where they were hugging, where she looked at him with her usual adoring smile. There, according to the detective, he told her in vivid colors what a crazy wife he had, how she blocked all their money, how she was acting irrationally. He hotly promised that everything would be resolved, that he had rights, that he wouldn't give up so simply, and soon, very soon, they would be living comfortably on his half of the fortune. Poor Kiana. She thought she had caught a winning ticket. A solid man from the city, a good age, with a house, money, with an unfair wife whom he was about to leave. And in reality, she got a 68-year-old man without access to accounts, with a sick mother on his tail, and a heap of illusions about what he was entitled to. Very quickly, the romance began to crack. As soon as the money was cut off, everything crumbled one by one. Marcus tried to pay with his card at a store, declined, transactions forbidden. Tried to withdraw cash from an ATM, operation impossible. He called the bank, demanded answers, argued, but the joint accounts were already under control. What belonged to me was defended like a fortress. He called Alicia several times, tried to pressure her. You have no right. I'll take you to court. Alicia politely but extremely coldly explained the same thing. All actions are taken by order of the account owner. Legally, there are no violations. If you want to contest something, apply officially. We will respond in the established order. Meanwhile, Kiana began to show her true face. First, dissatisfied sighs started. I need to pay loans. The kids are growing. Food is getting expensive. Then direct complaints. You promised you had money. I can't carry everything alone. When are you going to settle everything with your wife? The less money he had, the less romance remained. And I was living strangely enough an almost ordinary life during this time. I cared for Mother Beatrice, who of course was horrified that this crazy Vivian had cut off her expensive insurance but didn't even think to take my side. I still cooked, cleaned, went about my business. Only at night, when the house became quiet, I sat at the desk in my study and laid out documents before me. I hired the best family law attorneys I could find. We began collecting evidence of infidelity. Printouts of correspondence, detective reports, photos from hotels and restaurants, bank statements where it was visible in black and white, gifts, hotels, restaurants. Everything was paid for from the very cards I managed. Formally, it turned out that Marcus had been spending my money on his mistress for a long time. We pulled up all documents for 35 years of marriage. The prenuptial agreement was in force, clean, and unambiguous. The fact that my father once insisted on it turned out to be a real salvation. Financial advisors prepared a consolidated report on my property. I'll be honest, even I, knowing how many properties and investments I had, was amazed by the total figures. Those warehouses and lots my father left me for growth had long since turned into golden assets. My investments over these years had also multiplied many times over. I wasn't just a comfortable woman. I was a very wealthy woman, and Marcus was a very poor man. He just didn't fully realize it yet. Separately, I asked the detective to check Kiana. It turned out her simplicity and modesty cost the banks dearly. Consumer loans at wild interest rates, payday loans, rent arrears, overdue utility bills. The gifts Marcus bought her, she often resold immediately to plug another hole. The money he gave her for the children went to pay off old debts. Alicia said directly one evening. Vivian, we already have enough to calmly file for divorce and close this issue fast, sharp, without unnecessary drama. Do you want me to prepare everything? I looked at the stack of papers, the photos, the statements, and suddenly realized I didn't want it fast. I needed not only to legally sever this marriage. I wanted Marcus to truly understand what he had lost, for Kiana to see who was really in front of her when he didn't have access to joint money, for Mother Beatrice to live in reality without a servant in the form of a daughter-in-law for at least a couple of months. No, Alicia, I said then, we're not rushing just yet. She raised an eyebrow in surprise. Are you sure? More than sure, I answered. Let each of them live for a while in a world where I don't exist, and then we'll put a period on it. I closed the folder, got up from the table, walked around the room, and suddenly felt very clearly. The game is beginning, and it is my move now. Weeks dragged on one after another, and the further it went, the more interesting it became to watch Marcus's carefully built house of cards collapse. He tried to come back, of course he tried. A couple of times he showed up at the doorstep with bouquets, cheap but painstakingly chosen, with that guilty little smile of his. Vivian, I realized everything. He would start each time with new variations of the same speech. I'm a fool. Kiana is a mistake. You are the only one for me, the real one. I calmly accepted the flowers, put them in a vase, poured him coffee. We sat in the kitchen like long ago and talked, not like husband and wife but like old acquaintances who have something to discuss. He swore he would break everything off, that this story meant nothing, that he slipped but caught himself, promised that we would still live for ourselves, that everything could be fixed. I listened attentively, sometimes asked clarifying questions, nodded in the right places. He left after these conversations confident that he had almost persuaded me, that just a little more and I would surrender. He didn't know just one thing. Every visit, every sweet speech was recorded by cameras I had installed around the house beforehand. Quiet, unnoticeable, with good sound. All his "I'll drop everything. You are my only 1 inch" and subsequent calls to Kiana complaining about his wife turned into neat files in a separate folder. Parallel to this, Mother Beatrice's condition worsened. Without expensive insurance and the private clinic, she ended up in the system ordinary people live in, the district clinic, tickets, lines, doctors who have 5 minutes per patient. Caregivers no longer came to the house. There was simply nothing to pay them with. Those imported medicines she was once so proud of, I have only the best, were replaced by ordinary generics from the pharmacy. She was furious, screamed that I had ruined her life, that I was ungrateful, that you don't treat a mother like that. Yet even in her worst nightmare, she couldn't bring herself to take my side. I remained the guilty one regardless. But one day her anger began to turn in another direction. Where is my son? She hissed into the phone when she finally got through to Marcus. Why do I have to wait for a ticket if I've had the best treatment all my life? Why am I sitting here alone while he's out having fun who knows where? Marcus played the hero and tried to care for her himself for a couple of nights. Then he came for 3 nights. He got up for her, helped her to the bathroom, measured her blood pressure, listened to endless moans and complaints. He lasted exactly those 3 nights. On the 4th day, he looked as if he had aged another 10 years. I don't understand how you tolerated this for so many years. He exhaled, sinking onto a chair in the kitchen. I only shrugged. I got used to it. Meanwhile, the fairy tale with Kiana was finally bursting at the seams. The detective sent me reports with short comments. Loud argument today. She screamed she didn't get involved with him to carry everything alone. Called him a useless old man. Another time he accused her of being just as mercenary as everyone else, that she only needed his half of the fortune. She laughed and said he had nothing himself. Their great love without financial fuel lasted less than 2 months. I read these lines and caught myself thinking I was watching some cheap soap opera. Only one thing was different. This time I was the screenwriter. Against the backdrop of this circus, my own life began to change. Alicia said one evening, Vivian, you are constantly either with documents or with Mother Beatrice. You need to go out into the world at least sometimes. You are not just someone's wife and someone's nurse. First I brushed it off, but the thought stuck. I couldn't remember the last time I did something for myself. Not for the house, not for my husband, not for my mother-in-law, but specifically for myself. One day I went to a salon. I just picked up and made an appointment. Got a haircut, neat, modern, highlighting my gray rather than trying to hide it. Got my lashes tinted, got a manicure. Then went to a clothing store and bought myself a couple of things I actually liked, not just comfortable for the house. First it was strange. I looked in the mirror at a well-groomed woman and couldn't believe it was me. The same Vivian who for years walked around in stretched-out sweaters and old robes. Alicia, seeing me the next day, only smiled. Now you look like the real you. At her insistence, I joined a private club for female entrepreneurs. That was a distinct discovery. Sitting at one table were women my age and older who managed companies, flew around the world, realized projects, went to conferences, and not just to the summer house to make jam. One of them, Sarah, 72 years old, had just returned from a trip through Europe. She showed us photos on her phone. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, narrow streets, beautiful squares, cafes, the sea. Life doesn't end at 60, girls, she laughed. Sometimes at that moment it's only just beginning if you allow yourself to live. That phrase just started ringing in my head. I drove home from that meeting thinking, for 30 years I didn't live. I survived. I was the ideal wife, the convenient daughter-in-law, a quiet shadow in my own condo. And for what? So that at 68 they would try to trade me in for a younger, simpler version. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Just getting a divorce, that's not enough. I no longer cared what Marcus would say, whether Mother Beatrice would ever regret anything, whether Kiana would understand what stupidity she had engaged in. I wanted one thing, to put everything in its place, to show everyone who had looked down on me for so many years who I really am. Not Vivian sitting at home with Mama, but the owner of a company, the heiress and continuator of her father's business. A person who built an empire quietly in the shadows. And at some moment the idea came together by itself. I found a good publicist, explained that I wanted to host a charity gala. A dinner to benefit one of the city's nursing homes. A beautiful event, a large ballroom in an expensive hotel, famous people, journalists, charity society columns. This can be done, the publicist said confidently. You have the name, resources, connections, everything will be top level. We booked the best banquet hall in downtown Chicago, compiled a guest list. Entrepreneurs, politicians, artists, philanthropists, press representatives. Listed separately were Marcus Prescott, spouse, and Beatrice Prescott, mother of spouse. I personally signed the invitations for them. Marcus, receiving the envelope, at first didn't believe it, and then, as I was told, practically blossomed. In his head it looked like this. Wife is organizing a social evening, invites him to be by her side, which means she wants to restore the status of the couple. Since she is still officially his wife, why not? Mother Beatrice, hearing about the big charity evening, went into total delight. Both of them didn't even suspect that this evening would become for them not a confirmation of their importance, but something completely different. While they discussed what they would wear and how they would carry themselves with dignity, I thought of only one thing. Tonight I take off the mask of the quiet, invisible wife, and the whole room will see who Vivian Thorne Prescott really is. I remember the day of the charity gala in detail. In the morning I went to the best salon I could find. My gray hair was cut and styled so that the silver became not a sign of fatigue but part of the image. A neat, stylish woman who isn't trying to seem younger but calmly accepts her age. They did light makeup, highlighting my eyes, removed the traces of sleepless nights. Then I put on a dress Alicia and I had chosen for several days. Simple in style but flawless in fit, good fabric, ideal cut. On my neck, my mother's jewelry, which I almost never took out. On my feet, heels I had already managed to forget about. When I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving, for a second I felt uneasy. Standing before me was not a tired housewife, not a downtrodden daughter-in-law, but the very Vivian I once was, only grown with experience, with lived years on her face but alive. By evening, the hotel ballroom was already filled. Waiters walked around, soft music played, guests chatted, exchanged business cards. Famous names, serious people, journalists with cameras, photographers, everything as the publicist promised. Marcus arrived before me. I saw him from afar. A cheap suit, which he apparently considered dressy, looked especially strange against the backdrop of the perfectly fitting expensive jackets of the other men. He was noticeably nervous, tried to start conversations, inserted some phrases, but it was visible. He didn't understand what circle he had fallen into. Next to him in a wheelchair sat Mother Beatrice. The wheelchair, of course, was for the image. At home she walked perfectly fine with a cane, but here she decided to look especially suffering. She was wearing her best dress, hairdo, jewelry. She always loved to make an impression. When I entered the hall, people turned around. I felt gazes, whispers, a slight hum. Some recognized me from business meetings. Some saw me for the first time, but everyone was interested. I was the organizer of the evening and the main benefactor. Marcus looked at me, and I saw sincere shock on his face. It seems he didn't even immediately realize it was me. He rushed toward me, tried to take my arm as if we were still a married couple out in society. "Vivian, you look amazing," he muttered, trying to give his voice confidence. "Come, I'll introduce you to." I gently freed my arm. "Marcus, wait," I said evenly. "I need to greet the guests." And without letting him come to his senses, I turned and walked further to greet and hug those I truly wanted to be near. He remained standing in the middle of the room like a man who suddenly realized his role had been taken away, but no one had explained that the play had long been going on without him. The dinner proceeded calmly. Music, toasts, conversations at tables. Marcus tried to join conversations, but next to him sat people for whom words like project, deal, portfolio meant completely different scales than for him. He inserted stories about his hard work a few times, but few were interested. And then came the moment for which all this was started. An elderly man walked onto the stage, an old friend of my father, his former business partner. He thanked everyone for coming, said literally a couple of words about the purpose of the evening, fundraising for the city nursing home, and then smiled and said, "But the main reason we are here today is this woman, thanks to whom this evening became possible at all. A woman who for many years deliberately stayed in the shadows although she built a huge business and invested enormous money in the development of the city. She preferred to remain simply Vivian without loud titles. But today she decided to step out of the shadows and take her place." He paused, looked around the room and continued, "Please welcome Vivian Thorne Prescott, owner and CEO of the Thorne Development Group, one of the most influential and wealthy women in our city." Applause covered the hall like a wave. I got up from the table and walked to the stage. I didn't look at Marcus, but I felt his gaze literally with my skin. Probably in that moment he heard my surname not as Mrs. Prescott but as a separate, independent Thorne. I took the microphone, thanked everyone for the applause, for the warm words. I talked about my father, how he started practically from scratch on the south side, how he believed the city would grow, how he bought warehouses and land on the outskirts that no one wanted back then, how he taught me to count money and yet not forget about people. Then I talked about how after his death I took everything into my own hands, about our projects. Residential complexes, business centers, renovations of historic buildings, investments in new directions. On the huge screen behind my back, photos changed, buildings, blocks, offices, properties managed by my company. I heard people whispering in the hall, recognizing buildings where someone once worked or lived, amazed by the scale. I spoke calmly without pose, as if explaining to a girlfriend what I had been doing all these years, about how we create jobs, invest in urban improvement, support social projects, about how business has a responsibility to those who live in this city. And then I paused and said separately, "I want to say a few words about our charitable goal today. Older people very often find themselves needed by no one. Families are busy. Children are far away. Health is failing. They seem to fall out of life. I know too well what it's like when a person ages and becomes a burden, but it's one thing to care for them at home, and another when a person has no one at all." I shifted my gaze to Mother Beatrice for a second. She sat mouth open, unblinking. "Therefore today I want not just to raise funds. I want to take the first step myself." I named the sum, $500,000. Silence hung in the hall for half a second. Then applause erupted. $500,000. That is more than Marcus earned in the last 5 years combined. But I didn't say it for him. I said it for myself. For that Vivian who for 35 years walked around the house in a robe and listened to herself being called useless. When I finished the speech, people approached me one after another. Someone thanked me for helping the nursing home. Someone proposed joint projects. Someone asked for an interview. I talked, laughed, exchanged business cards. Marcus tried to break through to me a couple of times, but each time he was gently pushed aside by the next conversationalist. In this circle he was nobody, just an elderly man in a cheap suit. Mother Beatrice sat aside, gloomy, lips pursed. I knew that in her head right now her worldview was collapsing. Her servant, her failure, capable of nothing except caring for a sick old lady, suddenly turned out to be a woman who donates hundreds of thousands and manages projects she and her son hadn't even heard of. By the end of the evening, the hall began to empty. Tired but calm, I was already getting ready to leave when Marcus finally literally stood in my path. "We need to talk," he said hoarsely. I looked at him. Before me stood the same man I lived with for 35 years, but for the first time in all that time he looked small. Not physically, in essence. "Of course," I answered. "Tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning at my office. Alicia will send you the address." He blinked. "At the office?" "Yes, Marcus," I smiled slightly. "At my office." I turned and walked toward the exit, feeling his bewildered gaze on my back. For the first time in 35 years, the terms were dictated not by him. For the first time in 35 years, the meeting time and place were appointed by me. The next day, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I wanted everything to be in its place when he walked in. Our premises occupied an entire floor in a downtown skyscraper. Glass, a view of the Chicago skyline from a height, a strict reception zone. This was the world Marcus didn't even suspect existed while telling another woman how his poor wife sits at home with mama. At 10 o'clock, Alicia peeked into my office. "He's here." "Let him wait a couple of minutes," I answered, not lifting my head from the papers. "Let him feel what it's like to sit and wait while another person decides when their turn comes." A few minutes later the door opened. Alicia led Marcus into the office and quietly left. He stopped at the entrance looking around. Large space, panoramic windows, paintings on the walls, shelves with documents, a massive desk. This was not his familiar world of business trips and cheap hotels. I didn't jump up to meet him on purpose. I simply finished writing a line, only then raised my gaze. "Good morning, Marcus," I said calmly. "Sit down." He sank into the chair opposite, clearly feeling out of place. "Vivian, do we really need to do it all like this?" He began with a complaining note. "We are adults. We can handle this like human beings." "That is exactly what we are going to do now," I interrupted. "Like human beings." I nodded to Alicia. She entered, placed a thick folder and an envelope before him, after which she left again, leaving us alone. "Open it," I said. He took the folder, carefully opened it. First lay a stack of documents, already prepared divorce papers. Behind them a detailed list of our property. The house, cars, accounts, shares, properties. Opposite each item in black and white. Owner, Vivian Thorne Prescott. Marcus flipped through the pages, his cheeks flushed with blotches. "What is this?" he squeezed out. "This is what our finances actually looked like all these years," I answered. "And what they look like now." Next came the photographs. He and Kiana in restaurants, in hotels, against the backdrop of signs, printouts of correspondence, bank statements where it was visible which cards paid for gifts, restaurants, hotel rooms. Marcus froze, clutching the sheets. "You followed me," he whispered. "I gathered facts," I corrected. "Facts about how you spent my money on your mistress." He wanted to object, but I pointed to the envelope. "Let's get to the most interesting part. Open it." He obediently opened the envelope. Inside lay a check and a short printout. "What is this?" "This is the amount you earned and contributed to our house over 35 years, I said. "I asked the accountants to calculate everything, your official salary, your actual contributions to the family budget, without the bonuses you blew on business trips, without the cash you spent on your entertainment, only what really went to us." He fixed his gaze on the figure. For an ordinary person it was decent money, but compared to what I owned it was little. "It's yours," I continued. "I don't intend to take what you honestly earned. Never intended to." I leaned forward. "Everything else is mine. The house where you lived, the car you drove, the investments you didn't even know about. We have a prenuptial agreement on separate property." You signed it before the wedding voluntarily without reading, of course, but that is already your problem. He pursed his lips, his eyes filled with tears, either from anger or despair. It's unfair, he squeezed out. 35 years of marriage, Vivian. We are family. I was beside you my whole life. You can't just cross me out like that. I am not crossing you out, I said evenly. I am putting a period where you already mentally decided everything for yourself long ago. I took another folder lying nearby and placed it before him. Here is the detective's report regarding Kiana. He opened it. Debts, loans, overdue rent, and a couple more photos, already not with him but with another man younger and richer. Hugs, kisses, the dates, the very days when Marcus was sure she was waiting only for him. He paled. That's not true. These are facts, I said harshly. Exactly the same as your hotel bills. I leaned back in the chair. Now listen carefully, Marcus. This is the only time I will explain everything. He raised his eyes to me. Today you signed these divorce papers. I tapped my finger on the first folder. Take your check. Take your mother out of my house within a week, 7 days. He started. Wait, what do you mean take mother? Exactly as it sounds, I answered. Mother Beatrice is no longer my responsibility. If you want her to live beautifully with expensive insurance and caregivers, pay for it yourself. The house she lives in right now belongs to me. I am not obligated to support either her or you. He clenched his fists. You're going to throw her out on the street. An old woman. After everything she, I interrupted, did to me for 30 years. I am acting very gently. I am offering you time and money. That is more than enough. I met his gaze again. You move her out of my house, organize housing. What kind? That is no longer my business. He was silent, breathing heavily. And one more thing, I added. From this moment, you do not appear in my life without permission. No late-night calls, tearful messages, attempts to talk heart to heart. All questions only through my lawyer. He tried to act outraged. Vivian, you can't cut it off like that. We had a life, our years, our memories. We had my years, I corrected calmly. Yours went pretty well. Business trips, freedom, a younger woman. A caring wife at home who holds everything on her shoulders and stays silent. Now everyone will face their consequences. He squeezed his eyes shut, ran a hand over his face. I made a mistake. Not one, I said. Many over the course of many years. But 35 years of marriage, they mean something, he repeated stubbornly. I looked at him for a long time. They mean 35 years of my life, I uttered quietly. 35 years that I gave to the last drop to espouse, his mother, this house, 35 years while you used it and took it for granted. I paused briefly and added, and do you know what is most unpleasant? Not that you found yourself a Kiana, but that you sent me to the scrapyard long before her. In your conversations, in your plans, when discussing how you would live it up when I stopped being a convenient nurse. He looked away. Silence hung in the office. Only somewhere far away elevators hummed, and the city buzzed behind the glass. I don't want to humiliate you, Marcus, I said finally. I don't want to drag you through courts, tear your life to shreds. I have all the tools for that, but it doesn't interest me. I want one thing, to close this chapter. I slid a pen toward him. Sign. Take your money. Take your mother. Live as you see fit, just without me. He looked at the documents, the pen, the check. Fear, anger, despair, and something resembling understanding, belated, useless but still understanding, darted in his eyes. I have no choice. Is that it? He asked hoarsely. There is always a choice, I answered. You can choose not to sign, try to sue, waste years. We don't have many left anyway, but the result will be the same. He pursed his lips, took the pen. His hand shook so much the ink smeared slightly. His signature lay under every sheet. Under the divorce petition, under the agreement that he makes no claim to my property, under the clause that he takes what belongs to him and nothing more. When he placed the last signature, the pen slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly onto the table. He raised a gaze to me, empty, as if everything had been pumped out of him in these few minutes. And in that second, looking at this person with whom I had lived the greater part of my life, I felt very clearly, old Vivian is no more. The real me remains. After that meeting in the office, everything rolled very fast. That same day my lawyers filed documents in court. Formalities took a minimum of time. The prenuptial agreement, reports, proof of adultery, all signatures were already there. A couple of days later, Mother Beatrice received official notification. 7 days to vacate the house. She called, screamed into the receiver, accused me of all mortal sins, promised to curse me to the 7th generation. Throwing a sick old woman onto the street, she yelled. After everything I did for you. I calmly replied, you have a son, Mother Beatrice. Let him be responsible for you as it should be. In the end, she and Marcus rented a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts. His check allowed paying several months of rent and some debts, but no more. Then it was necessary not to dart around the country in comfort but to actually work, count every dollar, think about medicines, food, utilities. Mother Beatrice very quickly understood that living with her son in a cramped apartment without caregivers and expensive drugs is not the same as commanding from her room in my house where everything revolved around her whims. Kiana didn't withstand this spectacle for long. As soon as it became clear that there would be no house, no half-fortune, that instead of a rich man there was a tired old man with a mass of problems and a mother on his hands, her enthusiasm vanished. 2 weeks after Marcus moved his mother in with him, Kiana left him, found another. The real one, with money and without excess baggage. For her, Marcus turned out to be just a bad bet. He tried to write messages with apologies, attempts to start with a clean slate, declarations of love, moaning about how hard it was for him now. I simply blocked his number. There was nothing to discuss. Everything we could say to each other we had already said in my office. The divorce was finalized quickly, without scandals, without wars, without division. There was essentially nothing to divide. Thus ended a marriage 35 years long. And a completely different life began for me. First I occupied myself with the simplest thing, myself, not for someone, not to prove something to anyone, but for me. I hired a trainer, started working out 2 or 3 times a week. Little by little, the constant back pain went away. I started sleeping better. The blood pressure, of course, didn't go anywhere. Age takes its toll, but at least it stopped spiking from every stress. Then I remembered that the world exists not only between the kitchen, the pharmacy, and the office. I joined a travel club for people over 60, not tourism and sanatoriums but normal trips. Cities, museums, excursions, just walks. First was Europe. In Paris, I walked through Montmartre and thought that just a couple of years ago, I couldn't even imagine I would be walking alone through these streets without a husband, without his mother, without glancing back at someone's pills and whims. I stood under the Eiffel Tower at night when it lights up and caught myself thinking that I simply felt good. Not rapture, not hysteria, but a quiet sensation. This is life. I threw a coin into the Trevi fountain in Rome. I looked at gaudiest houses in Barcelona and thought that even concrete can be alive if there is imagination and freedom. I returned home and was already planning the next trip. Parallel to this, I immersed myself in work, but differently now, without the need to rush home by evening to manage to cook dinner and listen to complaints, without the constant thought that mama needs pills by the hour. We expanded the company, opened branches in other cities, launched several projects on affordable and eco-friendly housing. Not window dressing for reports, but real houses where people are comfortable living. One of such projects received an international award. For me, it was important not from the point of view of a medal but because it meant I was doing something not just for myself. Over time, another idea was born. I heard too often stories of women who, like me once, turned out to be completely dependent on their husbands financially. The husband put everything in his name, gave pocket money, controlled every penny, and then either left or simply turned life into hell. This is also violence, only not physical but economic. It leaves no bruises but it breaks people no less. I decided I wanted to deal with this seriously. I opened a foundation for women victims of economic abuse. We helped them legally, explained how to register property, how to defend their rights, how not to sign what would later turn against them, gave financial consultations, taught basic things, how to manage a budget, how to save, how not to get into insane debt. I often met with these women personally. We sat at a table, drank tea, and each told her story. In these tales I heard myself from 20-30 years ago. Someone cried, someone was angry, someone was ashamed. I always told them the same thing. Don't be kinder to me than I was to myself. Don't wait 35 years until they squeeze you to a state where you stop recognizing yourself in the mirror. Parallel to this, I began to return old girlfriends to my life. those with whom I communicated before marriage, those with whom communication faded because I didn't have time because Marcus always disliked my girlfriends because I had to sit with Mama. To my surprise, the majority didn't judge me. Someone simply said, "We understood you didn't disappear just for nothing. It's good you're back." We created our own little group, gathered at least once a week, went to the movies, exhibitions, cafes, just walked around the city. It seemed like nothing special, but for me it was like a breath of fresh air. One day at dinner, one of my friends, Karen, asked, "Vivian, do you not miss being married at all?" I thought about it. That marriage? No, I answered honestly. That wasn't a family but a pretty wrapper around my servitude. If I am ever with someone again, it will be on only one condition. No sacrificing myself for a man, only equal partnership. Honestly, for now I'm very good even alone. And that was the truth. There was no emptiness, no lonely longing. There was a sense of freedom. Sometimes quiet, sometimes very bright, but mine. About 6 months after the divorce, I accidentally ran into Marcus. I went into a shopping center to buy something for the house. Near the pharmacy I saw a familiar back. He stood in line with a basket full of medicines, aged, hunched in a cheap jacket, his face tired, gray. He turned and saw me. Vivian was all he could exhale. I nodded. "Hello, Marcus." We stood for a couple of seconds. "How are you?" he asked. "Good," I answered. "Working, living." "Mama is sick," he mumbled, nodding at the medicine. "I know," I said. "I won't pity you. That is your responsibility." I wished him health and turned away. Walking down the corridor of the mall, I listened to myself. There was no gloating, no pity, no pain. It was empty, as if I met a distant acquaintance from the past with whom everything has long been clear. Later, I learned from mutual acquaintances that eventually, he had to send Mother Beatrice to a state nursing home. He simply couldn't handle her care, work, and life in a small apartment. Now she lived in a shared room for 4 people with ordinary food, with duty doctors. Honestly speaking, I felt a little sorry for her, just a tiny bit. She could have lived out her old age differently if she had at least sometimes seen a human being in me, and not a free servant. But people rarely change at that age. She chose her role and in the end is living it out where there is space only for strangers' complaints and perfunctory care. I heard little about Kiana. They said she indeed found a man with more status and wealth. I hope at least this time she earns her living honestly and doesn't live only on other people's wallets. I almost don't think about Marcus. He became part of a closed chapter. A character in a story that ended. My business meanwhile grew. We opened offices in a few more cities, launched projects I had previously only dreamed of. I started being invited to conferences on panels about female leadership. A couple of times I gave interviews to business magazines, not as someone's wife but as an independent person. At some point I was invited to speak at a conference, a TEDx format, to talk about how one can literally reassemble one's life after 60. I thought for a long time whether to agree or not. Dragging the personal onto a big stage is a controversial activity. But on the other hand, my story already lived in the foundation in conversations with women. I walked onto the stage, took the microphone and told everything honestly, not about millions and projects but about how one can lose oneself in marriage, how to refuse a career, friends, interest because that's what's needed for the family, about how one day at 68 you can wake up and realize you have a huge fortune but no life of your own, and about the fact that it is never too late to start building it. The recording of this speech spread across the internet. Women wrote to me from all over the country and not only, from small towns, from big metropolises, from neighboring countries. Someone wrote, "Your story is like mine, only I am younger." Someone, "I was packing my bags to leave my husband and stumbled upon your video. It gave me the final push." I read these messages and thought, if at least one woman after this decides that she can't be treated like that anymore, then everything was not in vain. Now, a year after the divorce, I live in a house I designed myself. It is smaller than the previous one but all mine. Bright rooms, a large kitchen where I now cook when I want, not when I have to. No foreign complaints, no eternal dissatisfaction. In the yard, a small garden. I plant flowers and greens there, mess around in the earth and catch myself smiling just like that, alone without reason. I have 2 cats. Picked them up off the street, settled them in with me. They sleep where they want, follow me like a tail, sometimes act up. But their demands are simple. food, water, and a little affection that I can give. Morning starts with yoga and a mug of coffee on the terrace. Day meetings, projects, trips, work that truly fascinates me. Evening. Books, movies, sometimes theater or dinner with girlfriends. In my life there is no longer a person who will sit and comment that I didn't cook right, didn't dress right, and didn't dispose of my time right. Recently at a charity dinner I met a man, an architect, a widower slightly older than me. We got to talking about projects, about cities, about how neighborhoods change when normal business comes to them and not chaotic development. He asked for my number. I gave it but said right away, I am not looking for a serious relationship. I am good alone. If occasionally we have coffee, go to an exhibition, or just talk, please. He smiled. At this age, honestly speaking, I don't need anything else myself. We met a couple of times. It is pleasant to have a person nearby with whom you can speak the same language, but I no longer perceive relationships as something without which a woman is incomplete. I am complete even without that. And that is probably the main conclusion I came to. For 35 years I lived as if my value was defined by what kind of wife and daughter-in-law I was. Do I cook on time? Do I iron perfectly? Do I keep silent where I want to scream? Now I know value lies not in that. It is in who you are by yourself. In your mind, character, ability to take a hit, build, create, help others. Neither Marcus nor his mother ever saw this in me, they're right. But the bad thing isn't that they didn't see. The bad thing is that I myself at some moment stopped seeing. I cannot return those years to myself. Can't rewind my 40, 50, 60 to make a different choice then. But I can live the remaining time as I see fit. And that is exactly what I am doing. I will continue to develop my company, open more projects that will change cities. I will finish the foundation for women so that as few of them as possible fall into the trap of economic violence. I will write a book. Not memoirs for the sake of narcissism, but an honest story without embellishment. Without fairy tale revenge, without glamour. Simply the truth about how one can live dozens of years, not one's own life, and still one day say enough. I have a list of places I want to manage to visit while my legs walk and my head still works. I want to dance the tango in Buenos Aires, see the northern lights somewhere in Iceland, walk along the Great Wall of China. Maybe I won't manage everything, no big deal. The main thing is I will at least try. And if on the way I meet a person who will see an equal in me and not service personnel, who will respect my freedom and rejoice in my successes and not fear them, perhaps I will let him into my life. And if not, I will live worthily alone too, without self-pity, without eternal self-sacrifice for the sake of those who do not appreciate it. I am Vivian Thorne Prescott, 68 years old, entrepreneur, philanthropist, mentor, and simply a woman who finally lives the way she herself wants. I am free, and this freedom is worth more than those decades I spent to reach it.